The history of the EU can be traced back to the days following the Second World War. Europe had now felt the weight of 2 world wars in a very short period of time, and there was a profound need for a renewed sense of political unity to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Italy, and Luxembourg all had specialized industries, so instead of fighting over these resources, they combined their efforts via the European Coal and Steel Community, and these 6 founding member states came together in an agreement of peace, trade, and fellowship, marking the beginning of a more peaceful, prosperous, and united Europe. The question then becomes, is this expanding, inclusive EU the best model? How much might be too much?
Well, first of all, there's the economic connection that Europe as we know it today simply wouldn't work if there would be atomized individual nation states. You know, like if you go, for instance, grocery shopping, you know, like you'll have your bread basket will be filled with products from across Europe, vegetables from Poland, Italian pasta, you know, like pork from Denmark, fishes from France, etc. So this is, you know, like has become so ingrained economically. This is a market of 500 million people, fully integrated, that there is no going back. So the EU has a shared budget. So it's basically like a till where everybody needs to paid into according to the economic strength of the various members of the club. So, for instance, the United Kingdom or Germany pays in a much higher share per capita than, let's say, Latvia or Greece. And these funds are then dispersed according to the needs of the European Union at large. And once you have entered the EU, you have to agree in principle at eventually adopting the euro as it's a stated goal of EU membership, as the next frontier of economic integration, the single currency, right? So the idea is that gradually, as your economic strength grows, that you will adopt the euro.
The idea of Europe as a continent itself is a primarily Western view, almost exclusively American. It's evident that Europe is connected to parts of the Middle East, Russia, and much of what is considered Asia. So why then do we cluster the European peninsula as its own unit? Does Europe have anything remarkably specific and exclusive about it? And if so, do Europeans feel that? We took to the streets to ask Europeans themselves what being European means to them, and how the European Union affects them in their everyday lives, both at home and while here in America.
In terms of freedom of travel, I think it's really important.
So we were able to go and travel very freely, cross the borders without having to show a passport.
Open borders, both in terms of trade and in terms of personal travel.
Traveling, etc., which is really easy.
I like the idea that I would be able to work in different countries when Ireland doesn't have the industries that I'd be interested in working in. So that freedom of travel is really positive. I think it brings workers to places where there is work. And I also like the fact that I only need one passport.
Also, the same currency, having the same currency in all the countries that we traveled to was very convenient. Not having to exchange every time we crossed a border, anything like that.
I think it's really important for my country, France, because we can have a lot of exchanges with other countries. We have a lot of trade, and we have very friendly relations with our neighbors.
After the Second World War, France was pretty much in ruin, and like the whole situation and the whole all the treaties that finally led to the European Union helped us get in like a really sweet situation, you know. Like France is in a really better position than it was like 50 years ago.
What the European Union did for us is that they invested in our infrastructure. So we got so much infrastructure in our education, our agriculture, and just general roads and manufacturing, which has allowed us to grow to the country we are today.
Certain economies of of the European Union would have to support other ones that weren't doing so well. For example, Greece. Italy wasn't doing that great either when I was there. And a lot of people didn't like that the countries that were doing well would have to pick up the slack of other countries. But
Actually, it's the prices. They're way more expensive now than they used to be. And I guess as like the youth are pretty like, we're just used to that, but there is definitely an increase in prices. And actually, even with free markets, like the legislature and all the rules around the market are pretty much rigid, you know. Actually, it can be like a real setback on some businesses, you know.
You got all the stuff from other countries and you have troubles to selling your own materials or products in Germany because you have the whole competition with other countries in Europe who are much cheaper than in Germany to produce things like this. You know, everything in Europe now depends on the euro. So if one country fails, the other country is failing as well. And I think that right now with Greece and other European countries, what most people think is one of the hugest mistakes in Europe.
Being part of the European Union means that you are under the laws that are implemented at Brussels that individual countries don't have a say in per se in some of them.
Well, of course, when you work together, there are certain things that you have to give up, like certain rules that you have to abide by, agreements that you make with other countries. So it restricts you in some respects.
And it's harder to get consensus on some decisions since that now, like more countries coming in. That's why some people ask for like a return to the sixth fundamental like founders of the EU.
They're Italians first and Europeans second. So I mean, they don't really call themselves European.
The youth is more likely to feel European as I do. Because we've been growing up in that world with inside the European Union, because we've been taught about it in classes. I think for the older generations, it's a bit hard to actually understand more how the EU functions and what benefits actually has.
there's obviously great Italian pride, but people also view themselves as part of a greater body, a greater entity of Europe.
Yes, I would, definitely. I think many of my friends would too. We're born as European citizens in some kind, but I would definitely say I'm a European girl.
I'm French first and European then, but I feel European too.
Yeah, I do. Yes, I do. And more now than I used to, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm proud to be European.
Contemporarily, the European Union has been circulated in the news with the UK's recent decision to break away from the Union, in a move being popularly deemed Brexit. Concerns have arisen that other countries will soon begin to propose similar walkouts, which both jeopardizes the benefits of open borders and a single market, while also causing rift in mainland Europe.
No one was really saying that they were European until the Brexit situation came in, and then everyone who was opposing Brexit was identifying themselves as Europeans. So that's when I saw a sense of like European community.
I'm not sure that any other EU member has this weird arm's length relationship that the UK has with the EU. And I think other countries, such as, I think poorer countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, they really want to be in the EU and are really happy that they are.
The EU is just being used as a scapegoat for a lot of problems that are inherent to Britain rather than the European Union.
Scotland will definitely reconsider their being part of the UK because in the actual vote, if you looked at the breakdown of the regions, Scotland actually voted to stay in the EU and it was England that voted to leave, and that's definitely caused a lot of controversy.
What happens to the British economy affects the UK economy, and the pound's dropped massively since, so the Scottish pound has also dropped.
It would have been lovely in the future to have had the opportunity to be able to travel freely to the rest of Europe, to go and work freely in the rest of Europe, as easily as I would just moving in the UK. I mean, my citizenship to 27 member states is now being revoked against my permission.
I think that they may consider their agreement in the EU a lot, whether that's how much they give in economically or in trade, or how much they give politically as well. But I think Whether it leads to actual countries leaving the EU is something that only the future can tell.
There's definitely a strong power in this idea of coming together as many nations to support and interact with one another for the greater good. However, this idea of forming a union doesn't always work so effectively. So what makes the EU work the way that it does? How can poor and rich countries come into such an agreement and walk away with equal benefits? And to what extent does identity play a role in forming a greater union? Europe by no means transcends these complications. In fact, the EU fights these battles every single day, but it is through these battles, this discourse rather, that a stronger union is forged and is able to work for the benefit of all nations involved.